Imagine walking down Fifth Avenue. Not today's Fifth Avenue, but the one that existed before the skyscrapers, before the taxis, before the noise. The year is 1881. The streets are cobblestone. The air smells of coal smoke and ambition. And lining every block, rising from the earth like declarations of power, stand the townhouses. Not just homes, empires in miniature, fortresses of wealth dressed in marble and brownstone, each one a statement, each one a story. This is the Goldstone era, and tonight we go inside the world of New York's most iconic private architecture, the townhouse, where it came from, who built it, what it meant, and why, over a century later, it still defines what power looks like in America. Before we can understand the New York townhouse, we have to understand where it came from. The word itself, townhouse, carries centuries of European aristocracy within it. In 17th and 18th century England, the nobility maintained two residences: their country estate, where they governed their lands, and their townhouse, a home in the city, typically London, where they conducted politics, business, and social life. It was, in essence, the urban face of power. When that concept crossed the Atlantic, it found fertile ground in a city that was rapidly reinventing itself. New York in the early 1800s was not yet the colossus it would become, but it was hungry, ambitious, growing at a pace that shocked even its own residents. The city's famous grid plan, the Commissioner's Plan of 1811, had divided Manhattan into a rational, orderly system of numbered streets and avenues. For the first time, land could be bought, sold, and built upon with precision. The city was being drawn on paper before it existed in stone. And into that grid, the townhouse arrived. Early versions were modest, federal-style brick buildings, 2 or 3 stories, modest stoops, simple cornices. The wealthy merchants of Lower Manhattan built them close to their warehouses and counting houses. But as the decades passed, and as wealth in New York grew to proportions the world had never seen, the townhouse transformed. By the 1840s and 1850s, a new material had arrived: brownstone. Quarried in New Jersey and Connecticut, this warm, reddish-brown sandstone became the defining material of the New York townhouse. It was cheaper than marble, easier to cut than granite, and, crucially, it looked rich, substantial, permanent. A brownstone townhouse on a good block of Manhattan wasn't just a home, it was a credential. By 1881, the year at the heart of the Goldstone era, the New York townhouse had reached its apex. These were not simple dwellings. They were architectural masterpieces, engineered to project power, host society, and endure for generations. Let's go inside. Stand on the sidewalk in front of a typical Gilded Age townhouse, say on East 57th Street, or on the west side of Central Park, or along the grand stretch of 5th Avenue above 50th Street. The first thing you notice is the stoop. That wide, sweeping staircase rising from the street level up to the parlor floor, often 6, 8, even 12 steps, was not just practical. It was theatrical. You didn't simply enter a townhouse. You ascended to it. You were elevated. The very act of entering announced your status. Below the stoop, tucked beneath the main stairs, was the service entrance. The world of the Gilded Age ran on invisible labor: cooks, maids, butlers, laundresses, and they entered from below, through a separate door, unseen by visitors arriving above. This separation was intentional. It was architecture as social order made physical. Now, let's go through that front door. The entry hall was the first test. A narrow corridor, yes, but decorated with ferocious attention. Marble tile floors in geometric patterns, wainscoting of carved oak or walnut, a gilded mirror, a hat stand of extraordinary craftsmanship, gas sconces casting warm amber light on walls hung with oil paintings. Every detail was calculated. A visitor who passed through this hall in 30 seconds absorbed, consciously or not, the message the owner intended. I have taste. I have wealth. I belong here. Beyond the entry hall, the parlor floor. This was the social heart of the house. A double parlor, 2 connected rooms that could be thrown open for large gatherings, furnished with velvet sofas, Persian carpets, crystal chandeliers, and the finest European imports. The front parlor for formal reception. The back parlor, slightly more intimate, for conversation and music. Above the parlors, the dining room floor. In Gilded Age, New York, dinner was not a meal. It was a performance. The dining room of a serious townhouse could seat 20-30 guests. The table would be set with silver, crystal, and fine porcelain. Menus were printed in French. Wines were selected weeks in advance. And above that, the bedchambers, the family's private world. Sitting rooms, dressing rooms, nurseries, and at the very top, the servants' quarters tucked under the eaves, spare and functional, a world away from the grandeur below. The New York townhouse was, in essence, a machine for performing wealth. Every floor, every room, every detail served a purpose in the theatre of Gilded Age society. Now, let's talk about the families. Because you cannot understand the New York townhouse without understanding the extraordinary concentration of wealth that built it. The Gilded Age, that period roughly spanning 1870 to 1900, was the greatest accumulation of private fortune in American history, and possibly in the history of the world up to that point. The railroads had made men into gods. Cornelius Vanderbilt, the Commodore, had died in 1877, leaving an estate of over $100 million. His son William, known as Billy, doubled it. By 1881, the Vanderbilt family controlled more wealth than the United States Treasury held in reserve, and they built accordingly. On Fifth Avenue between 51st and 52nd Streets, William Henry Vanderbilt constructed a complex of townhouses that occupied an entire city block. Not one mansion, but a cluster of interconnected palaces, one for himself and adjoining homes for his daughters. The construction cost in $1881 was estimated at $2 million. A figure so staggering it was reported in newspapers across the country. The Astors, who had turned Manhattan real estate into a dynasty of their own, maintained a double townhouse on Fifth Avenue at 34th Street. Mrs. William Astor, Caroline Schermerhorn Astor, ruled New York society from this address with an authority that rivaled any political power in the city. Her ballroom, famously, could hold exactly 400 people. That number was not accidental. Ward McAllister, her social arbiter and companion, declared that New York society consisted of precisely 400 individuals, the number who could fit comfortably in Mrs. Astor's ballroom. To be among them was everything. To be excluded was social death. But the Vanderbilts and Astors were not alone. The Carnegies, the Morgans, the Belmonts, the Whitneys, every dynasty of the Gilded Age required a townhouse commensurate with their standing. And as each family built grander than the last, the architecture of Fifth Avenue became a competition in stone and marble. architects became celebrities. Richard Morris Hunt, the first American to study at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, became the architect of choice for New York's elite. His designs married French chateau grandeur with American ambition. He gave the Vanderbilt's Marble House in Newport. He gave New York the Metropolitan Museum's Fifth Avenue facade. Stanford White of McKim, Mead and White brought a different sensibility. More restrained, more classically American, but no less magnificent. His townhouse designs for clients on the Upper East Side set a standard that defined residential architecture for decades. These were not contractors following blueprints. They were artists reshaping the visual language of American power. Here is something that often gets forgotten when we romanticize the Gilded Age. These townhouses were, by the standards of 1881, extraordinarily high-tech. The wealthy didn't just buy bigger houses, they bought the future. Gaslighting had been transforming urban life since the 1840s. But by 1881, it had reached a level of sophistication that made these homes genuinely luminous. Crystal chandeliers holding dozens of gas jets could flood a dining room with warm, even light. Elaborate wall sconces lined hallways and parlors. The effect, to contemporary eyes, was almost magical. But gas was already being challenged. Thomas Edison had demonstrated his incandescent light bulb in 1879, just 2 years before the height of our story. By the early 1880s, the wealthiest New Yorkers were beginning to wire their homes for electricity. J.P. Morgan's Madison Avenue townhouse became one of the first private residences in New York to be fully electrified in 1882. He installed his own generator in the stable behind the house. His neighbors were not pleased. The generator shook the ground. It occasionally caught fire. But Morgan didn't care. He had the future in his house, and he knew it. Beyond lighting, the technological ambitions of the Gilded Age townhouse extended to heating, communication, and domestic service. Steam heating systems replaced fireplaces in many rooms. Speaking tubes, hollow pipes running between floors, allowed family members to communicate with the kitchen staff below. Dumbwaiters transported dishes, linens, and coal without requiring servants to carry them up multiple flights of stairs. The telephone arrived in New York in 1878. By 1881, the city had its first telephone exchange, and the wealthiest households were among the first to install lines. Imagine, for the first time in human history, you could speak to someone across the city without leaving your parlor. These houses were not relics. They were laboratories. But a house, no matter how grand, is only as alive as the people within it. And the social world of the Gilded Age townhouse was, by any measure, one of the most elaborate, ritualized, and ferociously competitive human ecosystems ever devised. It ran on a system of calls. Every afternoon between 3 and 5 o'clock, the ladies of New York society would make or receive social calls. A calling card left in a silver tray in the entry hall was the currency of this world. To call on someone was to acknowledge them. To be called upon was to be recognized. To be ignored was, in the language of the time, to be cut. And to be cut by the right person, by Mrs. Astor, by one of the Vanderbilt daughters, by any of the acknowledged arbiters of the 400, was a social wound from which many never recovered. The dinner party was an even higher stakes affair. A formal dinner in a Gilded Age townhouse followed a protocol of extraordinary precision. Guests arrived at 8. They were received in the drawing room. dinner was announced at 8:30. Guests processed to the dining room in order of precedence. Social rank, age, and gender, all calculated in advance by the hostess, who had spent days arranging the seating. The meal itself might run to 12 or 14 courses, spanning 2 to 3 hours. After dinner, the ladies retired to the drawing room, while the gentlemen remained at the table for port and cigars and what passed for serious conversation. Politics, finance, the affairs of the world. These were not parties, they were performances. Negotiations conducted in the language of food and furniture and flowers. Nothing lasts forever, not even gold. The Gilded Age began to unravel at the turn of the century, and the townhouse, that great monument to private wealth, unraveled with it. The forces that brought it down were multiple and unstoppable. First, the apartment. For most of the 19th century, respectable New Yorkers refused to live in apartment buildings. To share walls with strangers, to surrender the verticality of your own house for a horizontal floor of a larger building. This was considered at best bohemian and at worst, frankly, un-American. But the Gilded Age had created a new problem. Running a townhouse required an army of servants, and servants were becoming expensive, increasingly scarce, increasingly unwilling to work under the conditions that the old system demanded. The luxury apartment, pioneered by buildings like the Dakota, completed in 1884 on Central Park West, offered a radical proposition: the comfort and elegance of a great house without the burden of maintaining one. A staff shared across dozens of households. Efficiency disguised as luxury. The upper class resisted, then they relented, then they embraced it entirely. Second, the income tax. The 16th Amendment, ratified in 1913, introduced the federal income tax. For the first time, the vast fortunes of the Gilded Age were subject to systematic reduction. Running a townhouse with a staff of 15 suddenly required justifying the expense against a tax return. Third, the war. World War I shattered the social world that the townhouse had been built to house. The elaborate rituals of calling cards and formal dinners began to seem not just expensive, but absurd. Frivolous gestures in a world that had seen the Western Front. By the 1920s, the great townhouses of Fifth Avenue were falling one by one. The Vanderbilt mansions were demolished for department stores and office buildings. Mrs. Astor's double townhouse came down to make way for the original Waldorf Astoria Hotel. New York, as it always has, reinvented itself over the ruins of its own past. This was a small chapter of the Goldstone era. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more content like this. See you soon, my dear friends.